Curious George by H.A. Ray. Narrated by Kevin. This is George. He lived in Africa, but he was very happy. But he had one fault. He was too curious. One day, George saw a man. He had on a large yellow straw hat. The man saw George too. What a nice little monkey, he thought. I would like to take him home with me. The man put his hat on the ground, and of course George was curious. He came down from the tree and looked at the large yellow hat. The hat had been on the man's head. George thought it would be nice to put on his own head. He picked it up and put it on. The hat covered George's head, and he couldn't see. The man picked George up quickly and popped him in the bag. George was caught. The man with the big yellow hat put George in the little boat, and the sailor rowed them across the water to a ship. George was sad, but he was still a little curious. On the big ship, the things began to happen. The man took off the hat. George sat in a little stool, and the man said, "George, I'm going to take you to a zoo in the big city. You will like it there. Now run along and play, but don't get into trouble." George promised to be good, but it is easy for little monkeys to forget. On the deck, he found some seagulls. He wondered how they fly, and of course, George was curious. Finally, he had to try. It looked easy, but, oh, what happened? First this, then this. Where's George? The sailors looked and looked. At last, they saw him struggling in the water, almost all tired out. "Man overboard!" the sailors cried, and they threw him a lifeboat. George caught it and held on. At last, he was safe on board. After that, George was more careful to be a good monkey, until, at last, the long trip was over. George said goodbye to the kind sailors, and he and the man in the yellow hat walked off the ship onto the shore, into the big city where the man's house was. After a good meal, a good pipe, George felt very tired. He crawled into bed and fell asleep at once. The next morning, the man telephoned the zoo. George watched him and was fascinated. Then the man went away. George was curious. He wanted to telephone too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What fun! Ding-ling-ling! George had telephoned the fire station. The man rushed to the telephone. "Hello, hello," they said, but there was no answer. Then they looked for the signal on the big map that showed where the telephone call came from. They didn't know it was George. They thought it was a real fire. "Hurry, hurry, hurry!" The firemen jumped onto the big fire engines and onto the hook and ladders. "Ding dong, ding dong, everyone out of the way! Hurry, hurry, hurry!" The firemen rushed into the house. They opened the door. "No fire! Only little monkey! Oh, catch him, they cried. George tried to run away. He almost did, but he was caught in the telephone wire. Then a thin fireman on one arm and a fat fireman on the other. "You fooled the fire department," they said. "We will have to shut you up where you can't do any more harm." They took him away and shut him into a prison. George wanted to get out. He climbed to the window to try the bars. Just then, the watchman came in. He got a wooden stool to catch George, but the watchman was too big and heavy. The stool tipped up, the watchman fell over, and quick as lightning, George ran out through the open door. He hurried through the building and out the roof, and then he was lucky to be a monkey. Out he walked on the telephone wires, quickly and quietly, over the guard's head. George walked away. He was free. Down in the street, outside a prison wall, stood a balloon man. A little girl bought a balloon for her brother. George watched. He was curious. He felt he must have a bright red balloon. He reached over and tried to help himself, but instead of one balloon, he took the whole bunch, and it broke loose in an instant. The wind whisked them all away, and then with them went George, holding tight with both hands. Up, up he sailed higher and higher. The houses looked like toy houses, and people like dolls. George was frightened. He held on very tight. At first, the wind blew in great gusts. Then it quieted. Finally, stopped blowing altogether. George was very tired. Down, down he went, bump, onto the top of the traffic light. Everyone was surprised. The traffic got all mixed up. George didn't know what to do. And then he heard someone call, "George!" He looked down and saw his friend, the man with the big yellow hat. George was very happy. The man was happy too. George slid down the post, and the man with the big yellow hat put him under his arm. Then he paid the man for all the balloons. And George and the man climbed into the car, and at last they went to the zoo. What a nice place for George to live. The end.